Chapter 1. What is lactose intolerance? What is it? Lactose intolerance is essentially your body's inability to process lactose that you have ingested while eating dairy. Once you consume lactose, it sits in your stomach and causes numerous side effects. This can happen to both adults and children, and it could happen at any point in your life. Many studies have been conducted to attempt to determine if certain contributing factors can result in a higher likelihood of becoming lactose intolerant. As a result of some of these studies, they found that Native Americans, Asians, Africans, and Hispanics are believed to have a better chance at becoming lactose intolerant. Although with any race it is possible to have a lactose problem, it is believed that these races have a more difficult time processing lactose because their ancestors did not drink or eat dairy. Due to this lack of dairy, their bodies didn't have a chance to produce the enzyme known as lactase. When they inevitably have children, they pass down this enzyme deficiency because their bodies simply had no need to produce it. Studies have actually shown that 60% of the population in the United States is lactose intolerant right now, and that number is growing. If you break that down into races, you are looking at an astounding 75% of African Americans and Native Americans, and a whopping 90% of Asians. If you find yourself struggling with lactose intolerance, and you are curious where it came from, I suggest you start by looking through your family tree to see what you may have inherited from your ancestors. If you eat roughly the same foods that your ancestors ate, there is a good chance you are not going to have any issues digesting your food. Without this enzyme called lactase, the lactose that you have eaten cannot be digested properly and wreaks havoc on your system. Lactose is a sugar that is found in dairy products. When lactase is added, it is broken down and then easily digestible. Signs and symptoms. Signs and symptoms of lactose intolerance include diarrhea, nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, cramps, bloating, and gas. When it comes to this illness, the symptoms you will experience and the severity of the symptoms will both really depend on how bad your intolerance is. Some people experience a little gas and discomfort, while others may begin vomiting and have diarrhea. This can add up to significant pain in the meantime, because your body is trying its best to reject the lactose you ate. If you are extremely sensitive to the lactose, you could even experience cold sweats, in addition to the previously mentioned symptoms, which is often confused with food poisoning. These symptoms typically occur anywhere between 30 minutes and 2 hours after eating dairy. Can anyone get it? Lactose intolerance is not contagious. You are not randomly going to get it. Most of the time, the people who are lactose intolerant are that way because it is hereditary. Your genes have a lot to do with whether you are lactose intolerant or not. However, in saying that, there are some people that have become sick due to a parasite and become lactose intolerant after recovering. My husband is one of these lucky individuals. When a parasite is to blame, it is often an extreme illness that takes hold of your body. You are physically ill for a while due to this parasite or illness, and afterwards your stomach has been compromised so badly that you no longer have the enzymes to digest lactose anymore. This is rare, but it does happen and can affect you for the remainder of your life. Primary lactose intolerance is the most common type of lactose intolerance problem. This is where your body is creating enough lactase to digest your milk that you were given as an infant, allowing you to drink milk perfectly fine in your early years. However, as you begin to age, it quickly decreases, which means that by the time you are an adult, you start to experience the lactose issues. This again ties back to your genetics, as certain people are more genetically predisposed to being lactose intolerant. Secondary lactose intolerance is when your body stops producing the lactase when you have had an illness, surgery, or injury. This could possibly last your entire life, and not just during your time with the illness. Sometimes, but not all of the time, when the illness is taken care of, your lactose intolerance could go away, and your body begins to produce the lactase normally again. Developmental lactose intolerance is when a baby is born lactose intolerant. This is rare, though, because both mom and dad have to pass down a certain gene in order for this to happen. When this problem occurs, it could take doctors some time to figure out that the baby is having lactose problems. Many tests considering more serious problems could be done before he or she is diagnosed with lactose intolerance. With this, the baby will also have problems keeping weight on because all of the food it is being given is either being spit up or pushed through too quickly, so the baby isn't receiving all of the nutrients it should be getting from milk. The big problem with people who are lactose intolerant is that it seems to come and go. Sometimes the lactose is bothering you, while at other times it doesn't at all. This happens more when you are first starting to experience it, which makes it hard to isolate what is bothering you. I feel like this happens when your body has had enough time to build up lactase and was able to digest the food properly. You could eat the same thing a week later and have a reaction to it. Lactose intolerance in the beginning can be extremely confusing and hard to figure out. Tests. While you may be able to figure out if you are lactose intolerant by yourself due to your symptoms, you can also go to your doctor and be tested just to be sure. This also helps when you are telling a doctor that you are lactose intolerant, so that you can validate your self-diagnosis. Most of the time, doctors would like to know that you have experienced stomach cramps and diarrhea for at least a continuous 6-month period. Children going to school will also need a doctor's note before they will be able to have on file that they are lactose intolerant. There are 3 tests that your doctor can do, which include a lactose tolerance test, hydrogen breath test, and a stool acidity test. I will explain each of these below. Lactose intolerance test. Like I mentioned earlier, lactose is a sugar that is not digested correctly in your body. With this test, you will be given a drink that has lactose in it, and then 2 hours later they will test your blood to see if your glucose levels have risen or not. If it has, you are properly digesting lactose. But if it has not risen, your body is not digesting it properly and you are in fact lactose intolerant. The hard thing about these tests is that you have to put yourself through some pain by drinking a lactose drink just to find out for sure. Hydrogen breath test. In this test, they give you a drink that has high amounts of lactose in it. Afterward, they test your breath at certain intervals to see if your hydrogen levels are staying the same or rising. These intervals are usually every 30 minutes until you hit the 2-hour mark. If it begins to raise, you are having a reaction to the lactose in your digestive system. During this process, the lactose is fermenting in your colon and begins to release gases and hydrogen through your system until you exhale it, causing the rise in your hydrogen levels in your breath. Stool acidity test. This test is usually reserved for children 2 years of age and younger, who are not old enough for the other 2 tests. A stool test is taken and the acidity is measured to see if the lactose was digested correctly or not. With this test, the child is given a glass of dairy to drink, and then when they have a bowel movement, the acidity levels are tested. Once one or all of these tests are completed, your doctor will be able to tell you with a fair amount of certainty whether you do or do not have lactose intolerance. At this time, your doctor will tell you that you need to limit the amount of dairy in your life and eat balanced diet that is high in fiber. Doctors do not recommend any medications for lactose intolerance because there is not a medication that they can dependably prescribe for it. You may ask if they can recommend any over-the-counter medications, but most do not. One other thing you might want to consider before just assuming you are lactose intolerant is getting an allergy test done. there is a small chance that instead of being intolerant to lactose, you are actually allergic to dairy. When you have an allergy to something you are eating, you may not always have the obvious signs and symptoms. Some allergies are stomach-based, and as you continue to eat the item you are allergic to, you are continually irritating your stomach lining. With an allergy, your immune system doesn't recognize the protein in your food and attacks it. Most people don't have this problem, but it is important to know which issue you are dealing with in order to treat it correctly. What physically happens? If a person who is not lactose intolerant eats lactose, their body begins to digest it by producing an enzyme in the small intestine. This enzyme is called lactase, and it takes the sugars that are in the dairy product and breaks them down into simple sugar forms, called glucose and galactose. From here, these simple sugars are easily digested, absorbed into the bloodstream, and turned into energy for their bodies to use. A person who is lactose intolerant doesn't have the ability to digest the lactose easily. Our bodies either do not have lactase in them, or there is very little of it. If you have the lactase enzyme, odds are your body will digest some of the lactose, but usually not all of it, causing at least a little bit of gas. If you do not, your body immediately begins to reject the lactose you have eaten, and for some people this means an immediate rejection and vomiting. For those of us that are lactose intolerant, there is nothing in our bodies to digest lactose when we eat it. This undigested lactose sits in your stomach, and bacteria begin to break it down. The good news is that it is getting broken down. However, it is not being broken down the correct way, and symptoms of lactose intolerance begin to surface. Of course, this is when most people will begin to have the gas, bloating, pain, vomiting, and diarrhea that we mentioned earlier.